place. And we have got the next demand for the next satellite that is going to be going into space, wherein the Indian Astronomical Society has given us a grant of 5 crore rupees to build the next satellite for that on campus. And getting this kind of a win to a private school was again a very, very big win for us. So I think these triggers have happened in the research space. And we presently have around 30 PhDs in satellite technologies that are there in that particular division in our campus. So the next thing that is there is in terms of identity. Its ranking is very important for us. We also are going to be measured by that. We want to be amongst the top 100 in the world. So we need to look at what's happening to our competition and try to get there. So we are looking at placements as an entry strategy for branding. How many of our students are placed? Generally the placement percentages is around 90% and above always. We are also looking at placements in 3 different categories. Apart from average compensation, we're also looking at how many of our students make it to Ivy League schools, how many of our students make it to the IIMs that are there, and how many of them make it to premier research labs across the world. These are other indicators that are also being measured right now to know where we are headed as a group. And the last entity is teachers or faculty. I mean, everybody has been talking about it. Apart from what they do in terms of teaching and research, we are also trying to monitor amount of time that they spend with students interacting outside the classroom. Whether it is going to be projects, labs, or interactive areas, what is the time that you are spending? So lots of labs are there. We are saying that please tell us the time that you have spent with the student. Is it half an hour, 1 hour on an average? Because good researchers are there in all our facilities, but how much time are they spending with the students is something that we are closely monitoring. So this would in a nutshell be the 6 performance indicators, and we monitor all of these 6 through dashboards on a regular basis. I think it's all coming down to this. We start the journey with benchmarking ourselves, which we did long time back. When we started this journey, we identified the top 4 schools in Bangalore, and we said that we got to be better than them. So the 4 schools then was University Visvesvaraya College of Engineering, RV College of Engineering, BMS College of Engineering, and Bangalore Institute of Technology was the 4. And we took the statistics of these 4 institutions, and then we said that we should be better than them in all these parameters that we have identified. So now we have come to a next stage. We have now targeted 4 institutions in this country, whom we need to beat, and we said that this is a target in the next 4 years. So we have looked at the top IITs in the country, the top NIT in the country that is there, the top private university, 2 top private universities in the country. One is BITS Pilani and one more. And then we are number 5. Now we are saying, where are we going to be in this journey in the next? So it would be a good strategy for every one of us to identify something like at least 4 good schools, and then put yourself there as the 5th competitor and benchmark yourself against them and find out how you can do better. Ratings that are, yes. Then the second thing that is there is we measure for improvement. In case you look at these parameters that are there, we do the same spirit analysis of all these institutions and say what those numbers are. Sometimes the data that we get in public domain are not suitable. We have commissioned studies from private agencies to do a study of these institutions, and they have given us reports. Which exactly is the thing that is there? What are the actual numbers to what are the numbers that are there in various other ways that information is going to be there? And then we look at that data. And then innovate to excel is the third thing that is there. There are some unique drivers that bring in change with us. We have a strategy wherein saying that our top 20% of our faculty members would be having a stint in the US university by 2020. So en masse of them, 100 of them are there in line. All of them mandatorily have to do that particular thing, otherwise they're not going to be promoted. So these kind of strategies are there. We're also setting up a research center in California, and the top 5% of our students are going to be doing their final year project work in the Bay Area in association with the companies that are there in that particular place. So it all finally boils down to this execution. We can have a lot of ideas and thoughts. Who will execute? So there is a core bunch of people who have been identified, and in the sense that they've been divided into 22 domain areas, and these are my executors. So they have the strategy, that they understand the strategy, they execute at the functional level. These have paid some good dividends for us, and I'm sure that I'm open to any questions that are going to be there based on our experiences.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Jawad. So I think that was quite a fascinating account of how PES has made such huge strides over a very short period of time. So now I request our next speaker, Dr. Parag Diwan from the Great Lakes Education Group. Great Lakes again has made impressive strides in a short span, so let's hear what their vision is about taking this journey to excellence forward.
Colleagues, and some of you I'm meeting after a long time, and thank you also EPSI for giving me. I'm appearing for the first time on a EPSI forum. This takes me back to mid-90s when I was the director at AIMA, and that was the time when about 150 PGDM institutions, mostly in private sector, were born. And then there was a demand by all these colleagues, the director, fellow directors in these institutions. I see Dr. Chaturvedi only today from that time, that era, where they said that we should do a directors conclave, where we should discuss on some 4 or 5 key fundamentals which will lead to better institution building. So we created a very interesting, which I still remember, and it's still valid after 20 years, which is called the 4F framework. And I'm going to touch briefly, and things have evolved since 20 years ago. But one and foremost F is the funding or funds. How do funds come? Because all the promoting societies or trusts give a limited amount. Then what happens after that? Of course, there is a tuition fee structure, but tuition fee has to be market determined. And this, in today's world, the tuition fee can only be fixed what kind of ROI you give to students. And if you don't fail to meet that ROI, the next round of admissions will suffer. So that's a game. But there are other ways. Now I know, not us. We tried this very hard at my stint at University of Petroleum and Energy Studies. We had a fundraising group, and which raised funds in many different ways. And one way was that to have the equipment endowment, because we ran a very large engineering school as well. So I remember over last 10 odd years, about 30 odd crores worth of equipment, from latest pneumatic machines to oil rigs to, because oil industry is very equipment intensive. But those kind of things were raised from ONGCs and internationally. Another thing which we tried to do, and we succeeded to a limited extent, was naming rights. So you can have your buildings named by endowing companies. So we had a library, a Shell library, where Shell did an endowment, and we used their branding to build it further. The biggest part that this fundraising committee or group did was to fight for research money. And over these last about 50 odd crores have been raised by UPS in last 10 odd years in research. And I remember one very notable project which was high value, about 12 crore project, which the group, our faculty and other group, fought really hard against the IIT Mumbai and IIT Delhi to win that. So if you have a desire, if you want to raise funds, there are possibilities. It's not, we should not give up that we are a private sector institution, we can't compete or we will not get research grants. So funding is a multidimensional thing, and it will always be a multidimensional thing, and the leader of the institution would always, because in most American business schools, the dean's role is to fundraise. They even have what is called fundraising dinners, where you have to pay $500 per plate to attend those dinners. So that is the kind of things that happen. Let me give to next point, which is the next F, which is faculty. And a lot of people since morning, and Dr. Rishikesh and others have also dwelled upon it. Of course, it is very important to have great faculty, find faculty, attract faculty, develop faculty, retain faculty. But in our quest of rankings, whether QS rankings or B school rankings, we forget that the customer is our student. And I've always maintained a quadrant system, a 4-quadrant system. And at the heydays of UPS, when I was last there, we had 450 faculty members, which is a huge base. So I always endeavored there are at least 50 to 60% faculty among that who are great classroom teachers, because classroom teaching is very important, especially if you're running very large undergraduate programs. And if your students don't get value in the class, you are not really doing justice to your clientele. Another 20% or 15 to 20% would be researchers who will publish great papers, have your research output. But some of those researcher faculty may not be great classroom performers. Then there are another 10% which we researchly saw. Largely these people were from industry who made a transition to academia, who are the networking kinds, who would network, do outreach, do consulting projects, bring the corporate connect. And of course, every institution has 5% faculty who are stars, who will dwell very well on all the 3 dimensions of research, classroom performances, and the networking and outreach abilities. So that's very important, that how you create your faculty mix, and you always keep as he was saying, a dashboard of faculty competencies, that who are your classroom performers, how you nurture them in better performance. Sometimes you try to move them to the star quadrant by, let's say, if somebody is great researcher but not performing in classroom, give him inputs, give him direction, give him training to perform in the classroom, and vice versa. So that's very important in the faculty component. Third component comes as the freedom. I mean, there are many institutions which are very, very restrictive for both students and faculty, what you can do, what you cannot do. And so faculty should be given freedom, of course, given a dimension that they have to teach, they have to consult, they have to research, but freedom to innovate, freedom to experiment, freedom to teach innovations in the class, do outside the class activities with students. There are faculty who take out students for a long hike and do experiential learning. So you can't say that I will not allow that or I will not do that. So you have to have enabler. Similarly, in students, sometimes curriculum are very, very rigid. So these days, there's a lot of talk about CBCS, choice-based credit systems, and if you look into a lot of American schools, there is huge amount of rigorous studies underpinning in the first 2 years that you study with your engineering, philosophy, critical thinking, psychology, sociology, even anthropology. So that widens your horizon, so you're not becoming a unidimensional. So that kind of freedom one must give to faculty, to student, and not be a very, very restrictive environment. And the last F, of course, is the facilities and the infrastructure. As Dr. Jawahar was also saying, he's creating a world-class infrastructure, because that is given these days. I mean, this is 2016. We cannot have a great institution running out of shack or barracks. That era has gone. So student today also demands the minimum standard, and those institutions have to provide better than minimum standards for that, whether it's a mall-like thing or it's a fully air-conditioned facility or a well-floodlit stadium or whatever. So one has to do some attention, but that cannot be at the cost of the core academics. That is a add-on, that is a value addition or a cover around your main offerings. And last F, which is a F in the middle, is just the differentiator. How you differentiate your products, how you differentiate your quality of teaching, what is the value plus or your product portfolio, because we built an entire university on differentiation on energy, infrastructure and transportation sector. Nobody thought that a university or institution can be built around these three core pillars, and we created a whole new segment in education industry called EIT segment. So that's again a very hallmark of a institution, especially an upcoming institution, to see how he creates a niche, how he creates a differentiator, and where it really excels at. So those were few random thoughts from 20 years back, which are still available, and I've experienced it in 2 innings, which is at AIMA and UPS. And as he said, I've just begun a 3rd inning with the Great Lakes Group. Let's see what emerges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Diwan. So now we'll move to the final panelist, Dr. Nirjar. So he brings experience again from across the spectrum, from IIM system, from private institutions. So I'm hoping he can add some more dimensions to this discussion.
To begin with, as Sir mentioned, my diverse experiences, I am a unique sample. I was born and brought up in an educational institution in a campus, spent all my life in a campus, and I'm still in a campus, and probably I'll go down also in a campus, maybe in a class or maybe in some other place in a training session. So to begin with, being an optimist myself, I believe world class is not something which is only the category that the Western world can think of. If NUS can happen in Singapore, if AIM can happen in Manila, we are far, far better in terms of capabilities. We can do wonders. But there are certain issues. Some of them were rightly pointed out by Professor Krishnan and the other 2 panelists earlier. But I'll start with something which I strongly believe in. We have, and what I'm saying is general. I mean, I'm not saying there are not people who don't do otherwise. But the problem with our country is that we are happy with the status quo. We are happy with how things are. And we never want to think beyond. So there is a lack of aspiration somewhere. And that aspiration is something which is for everybody in an educational ecosystem. So it is not just about a leader or a faculty or the student having aspiration. The time that IIM Shillong started, I was invited to teach a strategy course for the first 2 batches. And I used to teach from 9 to 6 in the evening, and there was not one kid out of those 60 who would be drowsy or who would be tired or who would be whatever. So I was just trying to understand what is the background to all this situation, and what I could gather was that they had only one aspiration. How do we beat A, B and C? That is, I am A, I am B and I am C grads at student competitions. That's aspiration. And to be very frank, I don't mind saying that because I've always been a learner. I took a lesson from that. I said, boss, if you want to grow, you got to have aspiration, although which I had, but I said, set your benchmarks higher. So aspiration is something that seriously we all need to look at. So status quo is something which is there so that everybody is happy with, the faculty is happy with, and with all the wonderful explanations, that I'm talking in a very different line because I'm possibly the youngest among this lot, and my leadership role is hardly 2.5 months old. So I've seen leaders, I've been reporting to leaders, but I'm in the chair for a very short time. So I have a slightly different operational view, you might say. So everybody, including the faculty, is very happy. Now what's happening with the faculty? I have a huge concern with the faculty, and the concern is that, as Sir rightly pointed out, how much time do they spend in the classroom? I had a supervisor in Sheffield University whom his MBA students used to say and ask me, Abhishek, how do you bear him? He's a horrible teacher in class. I said, doesn't matter, he's a Pandu researcher. So what Dr. Diwan said, what Dr. Jawahar said, we don't have to have every faculty as somebody who's a magician in the classroom and a magician in the training session and a magician in the research lab. We've got to have people who can actually, moderate and have a portfolio of activities which is more balanced and is value adding. So that's the first point that I like to make. The second point which my mentor and my guru, Professor Bakul Dholakia, is a strong advocate of, is that this country is not only short of good faculty, this country is also short of good academic leaders. And the reason is, what happens traditionally is that the way that we appoint an academic leader, now there are certain changes happening here and there, is that we see, okay, fine, this much of research, this much of years of experience, this much of that, make him the director. And 50% of the time, it's a bomb. He doesn't know anything. Has he been a dean? Has he been a functional head? Has he handled a task? Has he been a warden? Has he done something else? We were not looking at these dimensions earlier. Now we've begun to do that. The corporate has a very interesting system. You've got succession planning done for years. You've got people being job rotated to give them exposure to the different dimensions of an aspect. Do we do that in academics? No. We don't have a program for academic leaders anywhere. We don't have a cadre for that. Possibly that's the need of the hour, that we must consciously think about creating a setup where we are able to churn out successful academic leaders who can take up responsibilities tomorrow. So that was one, academic leaders. Two, the mindset. Traditionally, what I've seen and what I've felt very strongly about, again, I'm done with 5, is that the era in which we underwent education, we believe that era still exists. Now, if I did my MBA in 1994, I can't think that the current MBA will be the same. It isn't by any standards. It's far, far, far more evolved. And if that is the case, have I evolved in my thinking as an instructor? Have I evolved in thinking as an academic leader? Is a huge question. So there is a point where we have to be more open to novelty. We've got to be more open to ideas. We've got to be more open to experimentation. And if we do not experiment with how can we add more value to the student, which Dr. Jawahar was rightly pointing out, and Dr. Diwan also gave ideas on that, we will not land up in anywhere near to what we call national class or world class. I don't think we'll be anywhere near that. So we've got to think of how we can add more value to not just our student, but also to the whole ecosystem, which is faculty, student, both. So that's point 2. Point 3, where do we get the faculty from? Where do we get the student from? So I would leave the student for a while, because I believe strongly, and again, one of my teachers, one of my colleagues whom I treat him as a teacher, was a very strong believer in the fact that if you have the right instruction, which is the academic environment, you have the right kind of faculty, which is about the merit of the faculty, and you have academic discipline. This again is one dimension which sweetly we love to sweep below the carpet. We don't want to have academic discipline. I mean, I've seen examples in institutions where there is a bit of, we tend to waver around this dimension. If you want to maintain standards, you've got to have discipline on those lines. Now, once these things are in place, he said, you don't have to worry about whether a company comes to you or not. The company will automatically come to you. Because placement, and I've said that in earlier other forums also, placement is a big pain for all of us. For the simple reason that the student, parent, anybody, I mean, even many of us as parents would be looking for the same thing. What is the package? What is the profile? What is the company? And when? Entrepreneurs, well, that's something that is gaining respect and relevance now. My last point, which, pardon me for being so straight, but, whether it's the government or entrepreneurs in the education domain, I teach entrepreneurship also, and I'm sure Professor Kishan would agree with this point, that when an entrepreneur takes off a venture, he starts a venture, it's his idea, his business model, whatever, all those stuff, he takes it off. But after a while, it makes sense to bring in professionals to do the job. And you sit and see the growth of the firm. So Google would not have been Google had Eric Schmidt not come into the role of a CEO, right? And that is something which has to happen here also. So we tend to have a more remote controlled functioning. We need to leave that to the professional. The guy who knows the task, give it to him, just sit and watch. And when you sit and watch, you've got to give time to that person. You can't expect wonders in 3 years, right? You've got to give him a time of at least 5. You can track that, that's not an issue. But you've got to give him time to play and show what can happen. I mean, we've got so many stories on the stage itself. There are so many stories inside this room right now that you've got to give them a fair amount of autonomy to do things the way that would make it work tomorrow. So in brief, that's what I would like to say, because I know time is a big issue with all of us. But last but not the least, funding. We saw fantastic figures from Columbia Business School, Harvard Business School, Chicago Booth, and these is nothing new for me at least, but these are good eye-openers. So we've got to choose our model. What do we want to do? What do we want to emphasize on? But then tuition fees, to my mind, is gone. It's not the only source of revenue. So we've got to look for research funding, and research funding obviously is the best nomenclature for funding to get, because that's the way that whether it's engineering, management or any other field, you can get funding, tying up with the corporates and getting funding. The government incidentally does give a lot of funding, and my experiences with that, pardon me, I don't know if anybody's from the government here or not, but even if it is, I don't care. I handle 11.5 lakh funding from AICT for doing research on innovation in large firms. It's been a hell of a job managing that funding and interacting with this body which is said to be a regulator also. Either they don't know how to manage it, or they don't know that I can manage it, or what. So I'm still in a fix of how to end that chapter, but I like to end that and end it forever. So let's not rely on that side. So we've got to look at the private sector, we've got to look at corporates, we've got to look at fantastic corporates who can certainly support us in research. The only thing they want, as far as I understand, is confidence of deliverables being delivered on time. And that is something that we have to own up to deliver on time.